Hi everyone. So I just wanted to give a recap of the AWS reInvent conference, kind of give you a glimpse into it. Last week it was held in conference was held in Las Vegas as every year around the same time. This is Amazon's premier conference and specifically for AWS Amazon Web Services announcements. They make a lot of announcements and then it has like a massive attendance. And this year there were more than 50,000 attendees on site, probably around between 50 to 60,000, and in all there were 300,000. There was a huge display. There were multiple vendors, and this was packed with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of new features that were reviewed by all the keynotes. So primarily there were multiple keynotes. The first one was by Adam Selipsky. He is basically he did the keynote starting on Tuesday, and the details I have put the link here. The You can hear his keynote on demand, and like you can watch on demand on that link. But basically, he looked like kind of everything was like digital and data, and he talked about infrastructure and basically forward thinking, transforming industries, and everything which was definitely powered by AWS. And then he talked about multiple innovations in data and infrastructure. And also he brought in a lot of customers, like speakers who gave insight into how they're using AWS to enhance their delivery to the customers. So the second day there were two sessions. Specifically, one was this morning was with the Swami Siva Subramanian, and he's basically the VP for data and machine learning. So he went over a lot of innovations related to data. So he discussed the strategies and strategies and how to empower the organizations to use the data. And interestingly, he brought in two customers. One of them was the CTO and president of Expedia, and then that was Rati Murthy. And then she discussed in details about overseeing the because she oversees the company's product and platform, and then she explained how then they're using multiple services from Amazon Web Services, and their experience, and they provide everybody must have used Expedia, right? So it was very interesting to see how she discussed the use of AWS. And again, there was also Anna, who's the VP, global VP R&D for IT for AstraZeneca, and then in her leadership, how they transformed the industry using AWS. So that was another interesting session. And on the Thursday, we there was keynote by Dr. Werner Vogels. Dr. Vogels is basically, everybody knows, right? He's the vice president CTO of AWS, Amazon.com actually, and then he's been uh, he went around and talked mostly about the event driven systems and how various customers are using various features like queuing, basically SNS, SQS, and then also the power of DynamoDB. And he highlighted basically innovations and emerging technologies that people are using to create systems that was like kind of not possible in the past. So they started off with somebody, with Dr. Vogels being in a shop and asking for like one thing at a time, kind of asynchronous versus synchronous. And you cannot do like stuff asynchronous, right? So you have to have synchronous parallel processing, like event driven queues, which will basically make things faster. And then he brought in Angela Timofte, and she is the director of engineering in AWS serverless. They have been using it. And also he brought in Nathan Thomas from Unreal Engine. He's the VP of Unreal Engine, and how they have been using multiple systems in the real time, basically gaming industry, and that was very interesting. So for me, right, when I went, I kind of captured everything. But for me, the key was to understand what are their next steps and what are their roadmaps for other lot of stuff, including multi-tenant, including EKS, and also something related in container announcements. So there were a lot of container announcements, and the key was, so one thing that was very good is that basically they're adding AWS Marketplace, adding extensions are being added to EKS cluster. So when you build EKS cluster, it is like you just the cluster doesn't help, right? Because we need to install external tools such as Splunk, Dynatrace, with some things for collecting the cost and stuff like that. So that all goes on top of the cluster. So very something very nice is that they added a feature. Now it's a marketplace, and then it has a lot of already pre-built, like Dynatrace is one of it, Cost is another. So what it does is, so you can and then there are others like Teleport, and then there is Istio, and I have and Factorhouse. I haven't worked with Factorhouse, but these are the launch partners. So if these are already available to the marketplace, then you can simply add it into your cluster creation, and then you don't have to work externally to add. And then they said that you could bring in more tools like Splunk and others. You have to work with your vendors and the partners. So that was something which was very interesting. And in addition to that, there were a lot of announcements made to ease out the cluster upgrade. So if you're using EKS, sometimes it gets very difficult to continue to, because you have to upgrade the control plane, you have to upgrade the worker node group, and then add-ons. So they said that they're working continuously to make that easier for the customers. And also they talked about cluster creation times they're going to reduce, which is less than 5 minutes, which is very interesting, because right now, I mean, it easily takes more than 15 to 20 minutes to build a cluster, which means including the control plane and the worker node group. So they're saying they're going to bring it out. So this was the EKS roadmap session. You can find it on online. This was presented by Mike and Nathan, who are the product manager and the principal product engineer at AWS, for the EKS group. So they had announced a lot of cool stuff. So one of them again was the manage node group scale to zero. So this was something like when you can scale down the node groups to zero, which means that if you're working, and then if you have multiple, if you sometimes you don't need to have a minimum number of nodes. That was not possible until now, but with this support, it can scale any non like mission critical node groups to zero, right, with zero downtime. And this will save cost, because why do you have to run if you don't need anything? And they've also simplified the setup. They have a cluster autoscaler which calls the case node groups APIs directly to discover any metadata which is needed to go back and up. So that was a really cool feature. And then they have a lot of new EKS. So IPv6 was already, I did a POC earlier, and I have one of the slides. I mean, I have one of the videos, sessions. So they already have support for IPv6, but there were some things that they added, including the simplification of networking, and also easy transitions, like from egress IPv4 traffic to move to IPv6. It should be pretty simple. And also scaling. So IPv4 limits, IPv4 has limits, IP address limits. So now they have faster pod launch times with pre-allocated IP addresses. So your pod and services will get an IPv6, but your node still uses IPv4 and IP. So it's a mix of dual stack and plain IPv4, IPv6. Another thing was the simplification of IAM roles on IRSA, and they have made a couple of changes over here. Like they've centralized the IAM role mapping, which is kind of cool, because normally what you have is you create a service account, and then you map it to the IAM role, and then you'll have to use the AWS auth config. So that there is something they're simplifying. They added VPC CLI network policy support. They also added a lot of security enhancements, because security is the key. It's the for um, any clusters or anything. And then they also had a multiple sessions with multi-tenancy, which means this was some other sessions I attended. But basically, if you have multiple teams and they want to use single EKS clusters, they could either use multiple namespaces, or they also discussed about using multi-tenancy when you have when you have multiple teams accessing like same database. So if you have one Dynamo database which has the information about orders or some other, microservices, so how to use, there was a session available which was very interesting. And finally, talking about Carpenter, this was something which was discussed. And Carpenter, they are adding it with, it's still out there, but I think they made some more enhancements. So basically what Carpenter does is it selects the most optimal nodes for your cluster, which based on your pod requirement and your preferences. So you can give those initial inputs, and then it will help you, to make the scaling decisions for you. So right now you must be using the auto scaler, which is installed on top of the clusters. But Carpenter has a lot of good features. It's fully supported, and it can be used, if you want to really use it. So this is something I captured, and I really so this is something that you can really explore. And they have a GitHub page for it, so just explore on your own.